Started in 1984. My first introduction to it was here when I was 8 years old, here in Williamsburg. 1963, I think it was. And you couldn't drag me out of the shop, like many parents, That planted the seed. For a little boy, hammering out some metal would be a pretty cool thing.
I start getting interested in cars. Just as the war was winding down, we could just suddenly get gasoline. And I said to my father, "Dad, how am I going to get a car?" And he said, "There's 3 ways you can get a car, son. If you had some money, you go down to the dealer and buy a car. If you had a little less money, get a used car. If you could run like hell, you could steal a car. But he says you can't run very fast." And I'm all down in the dumps. Then suddenly his expression changes. "The 4th way you can get a car." "How's that, Dad?" "You can build a car." And until after I got married, I had nothing but homemade cars. My wife said, "Geez, it's time we ought to get a car that had a top on it." And I thought, whoa, this is revolutionary. It doesn't sound like me, but anyway, we'll give it a shot.
I happened to walk into a blacksmith shop that was next to a winery in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. Looked around and I was like, wow, people are actually doing this, and they were offering workshops. I got to try this. We made a pair of tongs out of 3/4 square, lots of blisters on my hands and whatnot, but I did it. To me, this was a huge accomplishment, and I remember driving home on the last day of the workshop and rolling down the truck window, grabbing my hammer and just going, yeah, I did this.
Started trying to make nails and things in the early 70s when I was still in high school, playing at it and making a lot of scrap. A lot of stuff I couldn't even tell what I'd been trying to make. There was a catalog called Avalon Forge, John White. He had this catalog for reenactors, and I made things for him. Though he wasn't showing me blacksmith techniques, he told me what he wanted, and that gave me pictures. And that was very helpful.
Doing blacksmithing and then liking history, it's just a good fit. Before I even got out of high school, I went to work at Woodbury Blacksmith and Forge, and they did 18th century building hardware. And so I started out just doing 18th century building hardware.
My parents have collected antiques forever, my dad specifically, so I was drug around as a kid to antique stores and flea markets in southeastern Pennsylvania, which is like the land of gold for early American iron. I saw a blacksmith once at a Revolutionary War reenactment. I thought that was like the coolest thing. I was probably 10 or 11. And then we started coming to Colonial Williamsburg on family trips every year. Just became obsessed. I always was messing around with modifying bicycles and small engines and woodworking and stuff like that. I think I like, for me, the mechanical side and the sculptural side of ironwork. So that's what led me to blacksmithing, and then specifically 18th century work. Probably a big part of it was coming here a lot.
I actually got started, I was just out of high school, 19 years old, and I went to Genesee Country Museum. And it was Jeff Juvenville. And Jeff was working on a rather large pair of andirons for the museum. And he asked me if I could help him strike, and I'd never done any, I said, well, sure. Grabbed a sledgehammer and I struck for him that day. He goes, you might be really interested in an apprentice position at Colonial Williamsburg. A good friend of mine is, is a supervisor down there. So my wife and I drove down from Syracuse, and I was very nervous. And he said, yes, we'd like to have you on board. So that was in June of 1988.
You look to Colonial Williamsburg. It is a traditionalist, like I was. 18th century lighting and fireplace stuff. The first guy I saw that just took me by, all my attention was Tom Latané. When I saw that work, I said, oh my God, how can you do this stuff? But then, of course, Samuel Yellen, There's a reason he's revered as being the best, because it was incredible work. I've worked on many pieces, and every time I realize it's better than I even dreamed.
I had two really important teachers. One was my music teacher in high school, and the second was Dick, who...
I didn't know you carried tune and wheelbarrow.
Anyway, these two people both had unwavering high standards. There was never any question we were going to do things
The best way you can.
the best way you can. I learned, there's only one way to approach this, which is do the best you can. Look at old things that are really well done as
And
your
see
model.
how they were done.
Yeah.
Even before you make it yourself, you got to understand how it was done.
Yep.
And we're still learning. When we worked on that vice project, we had to eat up 2 vices with acid, and then you dumped it all out on the lawn in front of my shop, and nothing's grown there since. Nothing will grow there. It's just a road away.
Knowledge is growing there.
There was a point in my life where I thought I'd be happy just doing hooks and mug racks and letter openers and whatnot. But like any job, anything you do repetitively is going to get old. And in '93 is when I quit my sales job, and much to the chagrin of my wife, and went full time. And it's been a roller coaster ride ever since.
And I continue to be inspired by a lot of these, the guys I've worked with, this group especially. But I'm always learning. I'm not afraid to take on something, a project that I've never, made before. I like the challenge, and I think that makes you a better tradesperson. From the starting bar to the finished product, that's what I enjoy about blacksmithing. Taking that bar out of the fire, and you've got this limited time to work it into something. You're constantly being challenged all the time.
I think we are all a product of a combination of things that you see over your lifetime. We all pick up little tidbits. I like to think that one's signature for their ironwork is a combination of all those things that you saw, and it's kind of like a musician. Musician who likes this artist, they kind of take it all and put it into their own.
I always held the apprenticeship here in high regard, because there really is no place. People say, "Oh, I apprenticed with so and so," or no, you didn't apprentice or with some of the people in this group that have taken on students for years.
I grew up in an area that was rich in the ironwork of Cyril Kulnick, who legend has it that Captain Frederick Pabst of Pabst Brewing fame talked him into coming to Milwaukee to set up a shop. So there's kind of a smorgasbord of style.
I got a copy of the Dover Henry de Lemond's book. And that Dover copy, it's all dog-eared and it's just all beat up, and that, looking through the pages of that book, like, oh boy, wouldn't it be neat to make one? It's like, but yeah, that was one inspiration, seeing the stuff.
I was just figuring the stuff out on my own, or I would make something and bring it down to CW when I came, and would bring a little bag of stuff. Working in the footsteps of James Anderson's facility, and I think for me too, that's what I like about the historic work. It's like a time travel. I feel like I'm surrounded by all the people that are young, that are really passionate, and have the gusto to take on the historic work. Social media is a very powerful thing right now, whether people like it or not. When I was talking about making those shears, it was so cool that I posted that, and somebody all the way in England saw it and was able to help me out. So I don't know if that's a way to reach younger people, but I definitely wanted it as a kid. I wanted to do this work.
I see it moving on. People before Yellen said, oh, the trade was dead and gone. And that was 20 years before Yellen came on the scene. And so obviously they were wrong. That's the way I felt a few years ago, that it's just totally gone and wasted. But then I started traveling around to young guys' shops and meeting some new guys. And there's so much talent out there, it's unbelievable. But it's going in a different direction than what we're used to. I think it's going to be fine. But the traditional stuff like we do, here we are today, and how many young guys and we have coming into it, and they're good.
It's important to know where the books came from. To the younger generations, everything's going to look cool, but I'm gonna say this: there are books that shouldn't have been written. There are videos that shouldn't be on the internet because they're teaching the long way around the barn or just wrong process and wrong design entirely. Anybody can declare themselves a master, but it wasn't a term that you awarded yourself. It was given to you by a guild, much like this. You earned it.
No one would ever expect to pick up a violin and start to play. Don't expect to do the same thing with blacksmithing. As the old adage is, the first 100 are the most difficult. After that, it becomes a little easier. Francis Whitaker had a saying, and it was, mediocrity is the standard. Excellence excels. So you want to be successful in blacksmithing, you need to separate yourself from the crowd. And you do that by always trying to improve.
Repetition is probably the best way to go about learning to do this kind of work, but also being able to share your work with people that you aspire to, really putting yourself out there and moving to the front of the line and being like, hey, this is some stuff I made. Can you look at it? Here's some buckles I'm making, or these, trying hard to find, finding a group like this.
Seek out the very best smiths. And those are the guys you need to just break down and go to. Because, set the bar up. For me, I'm not a good smith at all. I really am not. I'm no good. But I watch Tom Latané. I watch people. I learn from these. Set the bar up way higher than anything you can ever reach. Because now I'm doing stuff I never dreamed I could get to. And look to the guys that are really good.
Beyond learning from other people, time at the anvil. I do teach, so I am seeing a lot of teens and 20-somethings wanting to learn, but it's fueled by things like Forged in Fire, which gives a misconception about what it is we do. That's why, again, this organization is important.
Most of the body of the blacksmith world is either doing art fair items or doing modern sculptural items, and so it's nice to have this group to go to for people that are interested in the more traditional techniques.
You think about the number of people that are into blacksmithing, bladesmithing, there's going to be a handful that are going to kind of go away from, making swords and knives and, wizard head bottle openers from railroad spikes. There's always going to be a group that wants a little more. So in other words, there is hope, I think, for keeping the traditional parts of what we do alive and keep it carried on.
I mean, you need more of this. And you need it in other fields too.
A community of other blacksmiths to visit with is a great inspiration. But just talking with people here has got me all excited. I've learned things today and look forward to learning things in the next couple of days that I wouldn't have figured out otherwise.
I like to say to my students, you could live 3 lifetimes and still not know all there is about this craft. It's a form of modern apprenticeship.
My hope is that what we're doing now will allow some of these younger smiths to be able to create their own signature. That's what I hope that we're able to do with this group.
Just a wealth of information in that group. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I think what really inspired me, I don't have a particular blacksmith, is the stuff that we seen on buildings, things, locks, things that were made by people. I don't know their name, who these names of these smiths were that made this stuff, but the stuff itself, it's inspired me. You're just overwhelmed and stunned by the beauty of these things, like the Notre Dame hinges. When I first saw those doors at Notre Dame, the portals at Notre Dame in Paris, and saw those hinges and actually touched them, it was like this, That's really, I almost cried. It was like, but you have to also understand those gates and those hinges were made by more than one person. It was teamwork, and that's the other thing that I think. Not one person. It's a group of people who, depending on where they are at and their level of blacksmithing, contribute to that project.
God didn't put us on this earth to serve ourselves. He put us on this earth to serve others. And I think the gifts that he's given us as blacksmiths need to be passed on.